I want to welcome you to the COMTO Transportation Braintrust. Good afternoon, COMTO. I know we're going to have a packed house, and I know people are trickling in, but it is 4 o'clock, and we like to get started on time. We want the trains to leave the station on time. I am Freddie Fuller, National Chair of the Board of Directors for COMTO, and also Vice President Jacobs. For those of you that don't know COMTO, we were founded in 1971 at Howard University, and our primary focus is to level a playing field for people of color, minorities, in transportation. We have folks all the way from the C-suite to first-line folks. So we are happy to be here today. We continue to do these brain trusts every year. We always have an excellent panel. We always have an excellent turnout, and I hope that you learned something from today. I was supposed to introduce the Honorable Congressman Elijah Cummings, but he had another commitment that had priority. So I do want to take the time to introduce Mr. Vernon Sims, his Chief of Staff. So Vernon, thank you.
Good afternoon. Congressman Cummings asked me to come. He couldn't be here. He wanted me to thank first COMTO for helping him to organize this brain trust every year. He also wanted me to thank each panelist. I know we don't want to spend all night. I won't introduce each. That'll happen later if it hasn't happened already. He had to be elsewhere today, so he said carry on. Amen? Amen. Amen. That's it.
Thank you. Yes, sir. All right. All right, now I'd like to introduce you to our President and CEO, Mr. Brad Mims.
Good afternoon, COMTO. And the COMTO family, good afternoon. I'd like to take a second to, good to see you, man. I'd like to take a second to talk about a couple things. Again, as Freddie said, we are one of the premier or the premier transportation organization that represents minorities in the transportation industry, and we're very, very proud of that. Almost 50 years old, and we're looking up, we're hitting 49 and about to turn 50 in 2021. So we're looking very forward to that milestone. As we're going forward, we are staring in the headlights of some significant change. And one of the things that we're dealing with, again, is change in technology. And as a result of that change of technology, we're going to have to, and our workforce is going to have to adapt to that. And so we thought it'd be prudent to deal with the whole issue of workforce and meeting the challenges that we are expecting to meet in the workforce, and the workforce in transportation multimodally. So we have a very distinguished panel here today. I want to make sure that you guys get the best information that we can on this issue. We are going to hear from our panelists. We're going to hear from our moderator shortly, but hear very interesting things from all of these persons here today. And I want you to take them and take them back with you to your various home jurisdictions as you go forward. What I'd like to do at this particular point is introduce to everybody someone who doesn't really need an introduction from me, the Honorable Henry Cisneros. And if we can give Mr. Cisneros a hand real quick. Former Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development Department during the Clinton administration, former mayor of San Antonio, Texas, and now he is one of the principals at Siebert, Cisneros, and Schenck. And you're going to be very, very interested to hear about some of the things that he has to say, and especially about finance as we're going forward. We're challenged by workforce and other issues, but as we need to do, and as you know that we need to do, it takes cash to finance all of the things that we need to do to restructure and to upgrade our infrastructure. So Mr. Cisneros, let's come forward if you would. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you very much. Brad, thank you very much for your kind words. It's a special treat to be here today among people who are professionals or interested in the field of transportation and infrastructure in our country. I want to specifically single out Congressman Elijah Cummings, Mr. Sims, who represented him here today, as one of the great figures defending our country in this difficult time. He has been a voice of conscience, a strong, strong voice that we recognize, and we know he's about his public service work today. Mr. Sims, thank you very much for being here on Congressman Sims' behalf. Also, to compliment COMTO for its work in trying to address the professional roles and opportunities for people of color in the transportation and infrastructure field. Mr. Fuller, who is the president, and Mr. Mims, who is Mr. Fuller, who is the chair, and Mims, who is the president, are working very hard. About over a year ago, I visited with Mr. Mims in his office, and he was really intent on scouring the country for talent and officials that he may have overlooked through the various means he has to bring people aboard. He was very sincere about continuing to build COMTO and share professional information and share updated developments in the country, but just empower people to be the best professionals in the transportation field that they can. I think we ought to say a special thank you to the leaders of COMTO for organizing this session. Thank you. Mr. Mims asked me to say just a few words about my own career and where transportation has intersected. I'll be very brief, but let me just say I was the mayor of San Antonio in the 1980s, and on my watch we worked to double-deck the freeway system to avoid the congestion that has impacted so many cities. We added an additional terminal at the airport, which continues to grow, expanded the bus system, and the present mayor of San Antonio has asked me to co-chair an effort called Connect SA, which looks at how we look at all of those systems of transportation and integrate them, and also figure out how we're going to pay for it. What do we have to do to our structure of sales taxes and other revenues to be able to support a modern transportation system? First of all, let me say I've learned two things from this Connect SA experience. One of them is how vital transportation is to people's lives in a city, and how these different modalities that have been independent in previous years are coming together. So we're now seeing cities do things like, for example, integrate neighborhood-oriented ride sharing, ride on demand, where people can call the likes of an Uber or a Lyft or even a public transit van to their home and then connect it at a station to the transportation system so that they can be connected to the system at large. And then at the other end of the ride are options like scooters and bicycles that are easily made available on demand on the street to get people to that last mile, all with an app that allows people to have paid in advance, so they have to put out no money when they board the transit system. And it's a combination of rail. Many cities are doing light rail. In our city, we're going to focus on what is called ART. It's one step beyond bus rapid transit, but it is rubber-tired, on dedicated roadway, frequently electronically driven, buses that look like trains because they have 2 or 3 cars attached to them and can run on schedule because they're in dedicated lanes. So that's just one brief look at how the transportation field is changing. From traffic signalization to management of congestion on roadways to integration to other systems, including airports, and you get a sense for that we're in a really changing time. I've been amazed the extent to which I look at cities across the country and they're all doing something in the transportation field. Whether it's putting in light rail systems, as Miami is doing. There's a piece in yesterday's paper about Miami just putting out an RFP for linking up Miami and Miami Beach, for example, with stations and rail. Los Angeles passed Measure M, a multi-billion-dollar commitment to build in Los Angeles. Name me a city, and you will find some commitment to advance transportation. And that leads me to my second observation about transportation from this experience, and that is that it is essential to working people. It's essential to people in our communities with a dimension of equity. If people cannot have meaningful transportation to get to work, to get to school, to get to hospital or doctor visits, then they are seriously impeded. If people cannot get a reasonable cost of transportation that takes them to homes that are affordable, some distance from the central core, then you add the cost of transportation to the cost of housing, and it becomes unaffordable in many cases. So transportation is absolutely essential. It's as essential to people's lives as their job or their health or their education or other elements of their existence, and we have to keep that in mind. As Mr. Mims said, I was Secretary of Housing for President Clinton, and I saw with my own eyes. I traveled to 200 different U.S. cities in every single one of the 50 states and could see these equity issues playing out, the linkage of housing and transportation. In the last several years, I joined Siebert Cisneros Schenck, ended up in an ownership position, and hence my name is on the firm. It is a revered African-American owned firm, now woman and African-American. Suzanne Shanks is the principal there. She's now listed on all of those lists as most influential women on Wall Street, outstanding woman in finance in America. You're going to hear a good deal more of her into the future. The firm is building very solidly, but it's all based on its technical competence in finance, principally using bonds, but all kinds of other strategies, revenue bonds and other things, and has made a special mark in transportation. The first half of this year, when the league tables came out listing the rankings of financing companies, Siebert Cisneros Schenck was ranked number 3 in the country, and that's with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and the others in the transportation field. So I'm just describing the way the field is evolving, but it's given me some insight into the finance side. My partners at SCS, I've mentioned Suzanne Schenck, include Bill Thompson, who was the controller of New York City. And he had been in finance before as an investment banker, and we're very proud to have him in this firm that really walks the walk of identifying people of color for positions of responsibility and bringing competent technical solutions to finance issues. My partners asked me to stand up, given my previous experience in private equity, stand up an element of the firm called American III, and the III stands for Infrastructure Innovation Investment. And what we're going to do in that entity is bring private capital to infrastructure solutions. And they lend themselves in a lot of areas of transportation to bring private capital from pension systems, insurance companies, and other sources of private capital to the infrastructure and transportation field. One of the places where this is really playing out is with airports. You may have followed the recent experience of LaGuardia, which is engaged firms like Carlyle and a firm of color, the combination of Loop and Magic Johnson called JLC, that has a role in the LaGuardia expansion. It's a massive transformation of LaGuardia Airport. Next on tap is John F. Kennedy Airport, where the Port of New York, New Jersey is investing massive amounts of money for the remake of JFK. So you're going to see more innovative solutions that involve private capital in the years going forward. Let me just wind down my comments here and go to the panelists in a second by just describing some of the real dimensions of the world in which we work that you should be apprised of. The first is America is far behind in our investment in infrastructure. The American Society on Civil Engineering estimates we have a $2 trillion gap, a $2 trillion gap in our infrastructure spending. That's what we would need to get our infrastructure just back up to usable. They give us a grade of D plus in our water systems, in our broadband speed, in our rail, passenger rail, in many of our airport facilities, in over-congested roads. We have a lot of work to do. So point number one is the country has got to decide, Democrats and Republicans together, that we will have to invest in infrastructure. Some of this will be federal action, which we have been begging for. The Congress working on different plans. The administration has proposed different plans. In this environment, it's hard to see any movement. But the dimensions they're talking about is $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion commitment to infrastructure over a 10-year period. So those of you who are in the field of infrastructure, particularly transportation, which usually is about 70% of most infrastructure plans, are in the right field because it's coming. There will emerge by necessity. We can't stay this far behind. You look at what the Japanese have in rapid rail, what the Chinese and the French have in rapid rail, and compare our Amtrak system, it's an embarrassment. The same thing is true in many of our facilities. People land at airport facilities from places in Asia and can't imagine which is the third world country, the one they came from or the one they came to. And we see our problems of toxic water in places like Flint and most recently in Newark. And you see that we really are in need of a major commitment to infrastructure. The second point I'd make is that not only are we at a critical point in terms of the volume of infrastructure needed and the opportunities for everybody in the business, constructors, designers, managers, financiers, and it is critical that minority people be involved in that process. Not only are we talking about volume, but we're going to see new forms of infrastructure. We're at a point of inflection. Let me make this point. Mr. Mims referred to it, where the applications of new technologies are going to change the definition of infrastructure. Absolutely. It's not only going to be just more of the same, more lanes of road, more fossil fuel power stations, more of the same. It's going to be new technologies applied to these things. So we have roads that can manage congestion because they have metrics embedded in them, and they steer people to less congested roadways. We have solutions like ART, electronic buses, which cost 1/3 of the costs of laying more rail, and is going to allow people to reach cities, to reach more people with mass transit than ever before. We have solutions related to everything from LED lights for cities that not only are lighting systems, but have other devices on them that can measure things like traffic congestion, even crime. So we're at a point where technology is changing the game, and what that means is cities are going to have to spend to make that transfer of technology. And they won't just build more, they will build different, and there's going to be many opportunities in that difference. The final point I would make is that is the theme of this meeting, which is infrastructure is more than just volume of construction. Embedded in that are questions of equity. Who gets the opportunities? Who gets the jobs? Are people prepared for the jobs in this infrastructure explosion? Do we have the construction firms and construction workers with the new technical skills in construction? Do we have people with IT training, STEM training, who can manage the technology applications to infrastructure? That's fundamentally what's ahead, and it's important to people who are already in the field, even more important to the generation that comes behind us, because America is going to spend, we are not going to be left behind, we are going to build our infrastructure, and we need to make sure that the opportunities are made available to people who look like the America that's changing, particularly in our metropolitan areas. All right, thank you. Let me go to our panel and ask each of the panelists to say just a few brief words about their background. we want to start just with introductions, and then we'll direct to questions related to the theme at hand. What I'd like to do is to eventually, over the course of the session, extract from each of the panelists their view of where transportation is going, any insights, any observations they have about transportation, and then secondly, any thoughts they have about these workforce issues and things they know about where somebody's got good ideas, state-of-the-art ideas. We know that we need to do better in our public schools, preparing young people for this next era, our community colleges with great opportunities for technical training, specialized programs to teach for transportation. For example, I've been watching what's happening at JFK in New York, and I attended a meeting at a high school in Jamaica, New York, which is a very African-American community. It's actually Caribbean African community. And the whole point there was, how are we going to get the jobs? And how are we going to teach our young people beginning in high school? And how are we going to create linkages to the community college system so that the $3.5 billion that's going to be spent on Terminals 6 and 7 by JetBlue at LaGuardia at JFK can include the people from the neighborhood. And that's just a precise example of the kind of thing we need to be doing. The first person I want to introduce is Treasurer Christian Dunbar. He is the new treasurer of the city of Philadelphia. Let's hear it for the treasurer. Treasurer of Philadelphia means two things. One, he's in the leadership of a critical American important city where infrastructure matters. It's yet to be done. And secondly, as the treasurer, he's the chief financial officer overseeing many of the systems that will make it possible to get that kind of work done. Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary Cisnero. Again, my name is Christian Dunbar. I am the city treasurer for the great city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. If you have not visited our great city, shame on you. We are a majority-minority city. And so in a role as treasurer, I run our debt portfolio, which is about $9 billion. It encompasses our wastewater system. It encompasses our airport. It encompasses our gas utility, which is the largest gas utility in the country, as well as our general obligation. I also manage our $4 billion investment portfolio. Also, I think it's important, besides being a treasurer of the city of Philadelphia, I also work on an effort around infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa, which, since this is a panel about opportunity, which is creating a tremendous amount of opportunity on the continent for folks of color as well. It's a partnership between USAID and National Association for Securities Professionals. And essentially, we convince U.S. pension plans, or we educate U.S. pension plans on investment opportunities in infrastructure on the continent. And we think it's critically important, if we're going to convince U.S. pension plans to think about investing on the continent, where the U.S. corporations play a role in the sourcing and the value chain of those investments on the continent. I look forward to discussing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer. Please. Our next presenter would be Shanetta Griffin. She is the Chief Commercial Officer for the Columbus Regional Airport Authority. And I know from my work in the field that the Columbus, Ohio Airport is thought of as one of the better managed airports in the entire country. So we're fortunate to have Shanetta with us today.
Thank you, Secretary.
Would you first pull the mic up close to you?
Yeah, I don't know if it was when.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's distance. Okay. You have to be real close to it.
All right, thank you. First off, I would like to thank the Honorable Elijah Cummings, even though he's not here, and certainly thank Mr. Sims here for representing him as kind of the catalyst for this conversation. Also thank the leadership of COMTO, both Brad and Freddie, for inviting me here to sit with these esteemed panelists. This is a very important conversation, one that we shouldn't just have one time, but continue to have around workforce development and how we can continue to expand to provide opportunity for small minority businesses and everyone that's in the workforce. So just a little bit about me. Those of you all that do know me, you did hear a new title. So I am a civil engineer by trade, but I have been in the industry for about 30 years in planning and engineering, and just recently took a new position with the airport on the revenue side of the house, which is very important for airports because everything that is generated in airports is how we sustain ourselves. So understanding that side of the business is very important. That is a part of the conversation, though, around workforce development and all the opportunities that exist at an airport. People think about pilots and they think about the operations on the airfield, but certainly there's many more opportunities, and we can talk a little bit about those as we look at workforce development from every area, from HR, IT, human resource, everything that makes an airport run. So again, engineer by trade. I've been doing engineering for both small minority firms, major firms, for the 30 years in my career, and so I'll talk a little bit more about that path, but I'm certainly an example of this change around workforce and being able to be innovative and creative in what we do in the transportation area.
Thank you very much, Ms. Griffin. Our next presenter is Mr. Joe Reed. He is the Vice President of the firm Balfour Beatty. He's responsible for alternative delivery, brings a view of finance. Mr. Reed.
Yes, I thank you for being here. Our company is very involved in the infrastructure across around the globe, but myself, I'm focused on the U.S. We're looking at design, building, financing, and operating infrastructure here. We were the co-lead on the RTD Fast Tracks project, which was the first P3 in Denver, which was the first P3 that the FTA did, where we design, build, and operate, and we still maintain that project for 30 years. We're also heavily involved in other major design, build infrastructure projects, major highway projects through Texas, currently doing the Green Line light rail extension in Boston, a 4-mile extension there through Somerville. Also, the other large airport expansions going on right now is LAX. They currently have about a $16 billion program there called LAMP, and we are actually doing the automated people mover system there.
Great.
It's about a $5.5 billion job, but we as private entities are putting up our funds, and we're going to design, build it, finance, and operate and maintain it for 30 years. And
thank you for joining us today. Mr. Reed, please. We look forward to hearing your sort of breaking out for us the way a firm like yours works in everything from design, financing, and operating major infrastructure projects. It's an example of what's happening in the country, and there's major opportunities, and people of color must be involved, not only because it's such a big opportunity, but because cities frequently say, we want to see what a consortium looks like and whether there's firms that are minority owned or operated in a consortium. These big projects, such as Mr. Reed described, are consortiums of firms, usually 5, 6 firms. LA Civic Center just announced last week 3 consortiums that will compete. One of them has a minority firm in it, the other 2 do not. But I think more and more we're going to see opportunities emerging in that arena. Let's see, Mr. Glass is Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy and Planning with the Maryland Department of Transportation. Mr. Glass.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. I'm pinch hitting for Deputy Secretary Lewis at MDOT. I'm really here to talk about Opportunity MDOT, a plan that's going to follow the Missouri model that Secretary Ron is establishing for our I-4095, I-270, P3, $9 to $11 billion. We don't even know how big it's going to be because it's just getting kicked off. And also our opportunities with the Purple Line construction. My background is I'm an environmental engineer. I've been with MDOT for 3 years, taught at Howard University for 17 years, and I actually come from an environmental focused background. I've been working mainly on alternative delivery inside MDOT in both our water program, our total maximum daily load program, TMDL, for the Chesapeake Bay, and we oversee our MBE programs and our DBE program at MDOT. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Glass, when you say, let's hear from Mr. Glass. Thank him for being present. When you say alternative delivery, can you describe just briefly to the audience what falls under the rubric of alternative delivery?
So we have a formal public-private partnership regulatory construct in the state of Maryland where you have to have some other source of revenue than the state to be a P3, but there are lots of different contract vehicles that can be created to establish relationships with private partners, other public entities, and the state, so that we can cobble together a partnership with hopefully funding that isn't just revenue from our Transportation Trust Fund. An example is a partnership that just kicked off between Walmart and the Nature Conservancy to have them actually design, build, operate, and maintain stormwater ponds for 20 years for us to meet our environmental regulatory obligations without us having to do it through a traditional contract vehicle where we actually get a designer and then a builder, and then we operate and maintain it and take the risk of it being flooded like Ellicott City twice in the last few years.
Does the state of Maryland encourage alternative structures of that nature by law or by policy, or?
The state of Maryland focuses on being open for business, Governor Hogan's slogan, and we try our best to find the most efficient way to use the people's money. And oftentimes that can be an alternative delivery system where we share the risk of the future with our consultants and contractors out in the field.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person in our panel of speakers and presenters is the Honorable Oliver Gilbert, who is the mayor of Miami Gardens, Florida. I think half of Miami Gardens is here today, Mayor.
We travel, yeah. We travel. You see that? Our airport isn't as good as yours, but man, but we travel. We're good. Yeah.
Tell us about your background, Mayor. I know you have worked in City of Miami as well as several tours as mayor of Miami Gardens.
Yes, I am. My name's Oliver Gilbert. I guess I'm a lawyer by trade, former prosecutor. I've been the mayor of Miami Gardens since 2012. Before that, I was on the council. I was an assistant state attorney. I worked for Janet Reno when she ran for governor. I wrote policy for her. So I come from a policy background. Currently, in addition to being the mayor, I'm also the chairperson of the TPO. The TPO is the organization that oversees all transportation in Dade County. So the project that you mentioned is called Baylink. It's actually one of the 6 rapid transit corridors that we're actually building out in Dade County. We've committed $9 billion to actually try to bring rapid transit all throughout the county. So yesterday, I guess I was speaking in front of the Transportation Committee in Congress about this very issue. And I speak about it a lot in rooms that look just like this, because I need us to be more involved. Not just from administrative perspective, not just from a, we're going to get, this DBE perspective, but you can do the project perspective.
Yeah.
You can do the project perspective. And we have to see transportation as something more than transportation. Transportation isn't just the trains or the BRT or the Bus Express, Rapid Transit, or the Baylink. It's not just those things. It's a land game. It's development. It's TOD. It's all the things that go into it. It's $1 billion absent the construction. It's $1 billion absent the operations. How you create wealth in communities in communities of color is understanding where the money is going to be spent. It's not just in building it. Well, we're gonna have a company that's gonna get paid $20 million just to clean these trains. That's what's gonna happen. So when we say we're gonna invest $9 billion in building rapid transit, that's really just the beginning, because we know that the money that's created from that, whether it be the businesses that are along the corridors, the people who build the stations, we know there's going to be more.
Right.
I also had the opportunity to travel to Asia, I guess maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and I will tell you, to the extent that you can find young, bright minds who are engaging technology in a meaningful way and incorporate them in your businesses, there is a place for that. You are right, we are far behind. And it's not, it's really un-American to be this far behind.
Yep.
Because we like winning. We like being the best. And so, but when you see what they're doing over there, they've been doing for 20 years.
Or more.
Yeah, they've been doing for 20 years that we're trying to get here. I said, well, somebody asked me, they said, well, why are you all going to China or Japan? I was like, the question isn't why we're going. The question is why we didn't take our universities, our private industry, why we didn't take everybody else? Because ultimately, we need to see how they got where they are, and then we need to pass them. Because it is a national emergency for us to be this far behind.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. I want to go to a round of questions, and people who know that I've moderated before will know that I'm not going to go down the line on every question because it gets really boring for the audience. What I'd like to do is throw out some questions and see who's got a thought about it, and then move quickly on to a different set of questions. But before we do that, I'd like to know who's in the room so we know a little bit about what interests you and how to direct the questions. You're all interested in transportation in some form, presumably, and the financing behind it and the equity behind it. How many of you work for an entity that is involved in transportation or infrastructure in the public sector? Can I see the hands of those folks? So a good half of the room is involved in the public sector side working for. How many of you work for firms, private firms that are involved in transportation or infrastructure? Okay. How many of you are here because you think it's a coming field and you just wanted to learn more about the language of transportation and the direction of policy? Anybody, any hands on folks who are here for that purpose? Okay. Well, I think that pretty well accounts for the room. A different.
How many of you are public educators?
Okay.
How many of you came for the snacks? No.
How many are interested, or how many are interested because of your work in the field of workforce development and how we prepare people for future jobs in this? Okay, good. All right, good. So the first question is, I asserted in my opening comments that America is far behind, has big gaps to close, has to employ new technologies, and that the future has to be in front of the whole transportation field if we're going to keep up. If we're going to keep our cities strong, which are the engines of our economy, our metropolitan areas, if we're going to link cities together, if we're going to take opportunities that presently exist in the metros out to the rural areas and reduce this urban-rural contention and divide that is besetting our country today by getting opportunities out there. You can't put a branch plant if you can't transport cargo to it, for example. So would any of you on the panel be willing to say a few words about this gap problem and things that you see that are being done to address it? Where you think we need to go, I guess, is the question. Any of you that want to speak to this? Sure. We'll keep it brief.
I would just like to say I think you've already seen people starting to address that gap. You've seen the initiatives passed by California, by Washington, LA Metro,
mostly about transit.
Mostly about transit, trying to provide the transportation and along with that, the jobs and the connections that everybody needs to do. At the same time, we're seeing all these other infrastructure needs that we've got across the country.
Like
we've got 3 high-speed rail potential projects going on in the United States right now.
California, Texas, Florida,
and Vegas to
LA.
And you look at, there's a need there, and when there's a need, there's always somebody's going to come in and fill that need. 2 of those 3 right now are being funded by foreign governments. They see the need, the development, and a potential for it. So 2 of those are being funded by foreign governments right now.
Okay. Let me ask the mayor to speak to that, because I read just yesterday that the mayor of Miami has said that if the Chinese bid on the rapid rail that we were discussing between Miami and Miami Beach, that he would not support it because it's Chinese rolling stock. And there have been a lot of stories about the Chinese embedding espionage machinery into the rolling stock that they sell us. We have no manufacturer of rail rolling stock in the United States. So it'll have to be some kind of a foreign entity, the French, the Chinese, the Japanese, or somebody. Do you just want to speak, Mayor, a few words, since you're on the ground as chairman of the Transportation Policy Group in
Yeah, the mayor that said that was the mayor of Miami-Dade County. It was Carlos Jimenez, and I respect his opinion. It's just, it's interesting and very difficult to grapple with from this perspective. We don't have the capacities to do it here. And if we have the capacity to do it here, that it's going to cost us a lot more to do here. And so the reason he came to that point is because Congress is actually contemplating a bill that actually prohibits us from actually using, if you're going to have any federal involvement financially, you won't be able to actually purchase from China.
Is it just China?
I think it is just China. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just, I think they picked out China.
Yeah.
It wasn't Russia. No, it was China.
Yeah. Now, I do know this.
That part.
I do know this.
Yeah. That part. But okay.
But there's been some critique of using any foreign rolling stock. But the Texas system, which people expect to be the likeliest to make, it will connect Houston and Dallas, and I think it's about an hour and a half a ride at 150 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour to Houston, between Houston and Dallas, and that is a partnership with Japanese, Mitsubishi and other manufacturing systems. So in some places, I mean, many people believe this article that I was reading says essentially we are behind because we have not teamed up with foreign manufacturers. We have none in the United States. And the difficulty in teaming up with a foreign manufacturer is why we are behind in that field. The Texas line is addressing it.
Well, yeah, and I think you might have hit the nail on the head, because I think the biggest winner in all of this is probably still not going to be a United States company, a U.S. company. I think it's probably going to be a Japanese company or European company, because we don't necessarily do that here. I had some initial thoughts about it when I read that Congress was contemplating doing this, because they're contemplating doing this, but Congress has been woefully inept with regard to funding transportation the way it should. So to have a rule that would make it more expensive is dumbfounding to me.
Okay.
That you can make something more expensive that you're not willing to pay for. But understanding that, we know that's going to make our projects more expensive, and it's the law. We'll comply with it. We're committed in Dade County to build without regard to whether we can use Chinese builders or not.
Let me ask Shanetta if she could give us a brief update on kind of the state of play in airports. You have a panoply that allows you to see the country. How do you feel airports measure up on this issue of the gap, how far behind we are, and what is happening?
So this is, airports have always been in the conversation about being third world environments, third world environments in regards to when you travel internationally, and I think we've touched on that on a couple areas, but airports as a whole struggle more on the sense of how we finance each other, and I mentioned that as I started. Most airports are in some form of not necessarily going out of business, but certainly struggling in the sense of how do we find finances? How do we go about finding alternative means of financing? So the gap that we talk about in regards to this infrastructure and alternative delivery and how we're going to execute on projects with infrastructure that's just as old as what you mentioned that ASCE is talking about. Our infrastructure is the same way.
Airport infrastructure? Airport
infrastructure is the exact same way. Runways that were put in and are 50 years old that were intended to last for 30 years. If you go and do a new runway, that's about $40–50 million. How do you finance that?
If you can acquire the land, and if you can acquire the space for expansion, and if you can satisfy the neighbors that you're not going to bring more noise. And
most certainly. Yep. All of those things from an airport perspective are where we are. But the good side of that, though, is that we're trying to find innovative ways of which to be creative around that. We can't
the
financing side.
Many airports are considering P3 kind of models.
They are considering P3, but the thing about that is that you give away your opportunity for growth in those areas, just like any other P3. If you have an entity to come in and they say they're going to build a terminal, and I think, Joe, you mentioned that you have a 30-year deal. Well, 30 years of non-revenue in that area has to be made up someplace else. So certainly that's an opportunity, because now it's growing as a way to be able to do work at airports, because one, it's hard to find contractors who can come in and provide the workforce, and that's a whole nother conversation around the education of the workforce that's needed. And we've got to go back to the high schools and the grade schools and have that conversation.
We'll get to the workforce in a minute, but let me just ask you to inform the audience, if you would, on the types of changes that are happening at airports. You mentioned runways, you made a brief reference to terminals.
Sure.
What else is going to be being upgraded? Rental car areas, fuel farms?
Most certainly. All of those that are critical infrastructure for airports.
Tell us more.
Well, the big thing around that, and even when you think about rental car facilities, we're building one right now in Columbus. When we're building garages, the whole idea of autonomous vehicles, of intelligent transportation roadways, how that impacts Uber and Lyft, how that's impacting terminal frontages when we drop all the cars off. So all of those things are being considered, but again, you get back to the fact that airports don't have a lot of land around them. Some do, some don't. Right. But a lot of the criteria out of policy doesn't allow us to go out and obtain a lot of that land. We have to go through an extensive process, both environmentally and what's called a land release. So there's a lot of
It's probably a 40-year process to build a new airport.
Well,
if there's any,
when you start all the planning and all of that, that's exactly where you end up.
Let me give you a quick example, and ask Shanetta to comment on it, of where technology that you don't think is related changes how an airport functions. Uber and Lyft. Nobody thought that. Well, nobody would think, what are the implications for airports? But at LAX, it required a complete rethinking of the parking strategy, because lines were a mile long of Ubers and Lyfts trying to get into the airport and pick people up at the same place. Just didn't work. Cell phones before that, you know, they had to create cell phone lots for people to wait, because you can't have them waiting on the airport roadways and such. Can you speak to technology and what it's doing?
Well, technology is impacting a lot of those. Certainly Uber and Lyft is one, but when you get into the terminal and now you're looking at biometrics, you're looking at different ways of which we're going through and being evaluated, and that is what it is, an evaluation process when you go through a security checkpoint. Yep. Your information is being stored. How is that going to be analyzed? You have to continue to wonder about cyber security. So technology certainly is impacting us in a way that we've not thought about. But again, from an international perspective, these are things that they've been doing for many years.
But it does make the point. That we're going to have to upgrade the expenditure on these facilities, because you can't make these changes without spending some money. And so there's big issues out in front of us. Treasurer Dunbar, can you describe, from a Philadelphia standpoint, what you think are the principal infrastructure challenges that are likely to be addressed?
Certainly, and I want to circle back a little bit also to, from a finance perspective, anytime you issue debt, you have to think about a 30-year time horizon. And so, you know, to my colleague's point, just in terms of you think about building, excuse me, thank you. When you think about building say a parking lot, you have to start to think about autonomous vehicles. You may even have to think about vehicles that are landing on parking lots. And when you think about 30 years from now, right, or even if you go back 10 years from now, Uber and Lyft weren't significant factors as it relates to the airport space. I think you're going to start to see, when we talk about revenue, where if you want to drop people off in front of an airport, you will start to have to pay for that, because the value of that parking spot, when you think about these long lines, will matter. And so you may have to start building facilities, right, where people get bused into airports and what have you, because nowadays most of us are not driving to the airport anymore. We're using a ride-sharing service. And so let
me close this section on the things that are coming by just asking. I'm going to list a series of areas in the transportation field, just in transportation, and ask you to say a quick word. Anybody who has a word to say about them. So let me just say, bus service. Anybody have any thoughts about where we're going on bus service? Better bus routes, new equipment?
Smarter routes, actually more services. I think buses are here to stay. They're probably going to, smarter routes, but
It's all
more
about
buses.
frequency.
Yeah.
Frequency, okay?
Bus rapid transit and dedicated lanes in urban environments.
Bus rapid transit on dedicated lanes. The reason many white-collar workers don't ride buses is because they can't depend on when it's going to arrive. But if they have dedicated lanes and don't get caught in the traffic, then they can show up on time, and you can buy more rolling stock because it's less expensive than rail. So you can say if you missed one, there'll be another one coming in 8 minutes. And they come right on in those dedicated. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and in 10 years, if they are also linked, just like semis on highways,
Right.
Maybe when we have, robots driving the vehicles, which we have to address too from a workforce development perspective.
You expect them to be autonomous, electronic autonomous?
I expect you to be able to use your watch to know when they're coming and walk out, and for them to be linked so that you know when the next one's coming, and it might even be in your ear. But connecting to autonomous vehicles and the safety that we should see enhancements. I don't know if anyone's bought a car in the last 2 years. My new minivan brakes for me. My wife doesn't trust it, but I do, probably to my risk. But that's going to be throughout everything.
All right, let me mention another transportation mode, bicycles. Tell me what the future implications are of bicycles. By that I mean there's many more on the street, people are insisting on protected lanes, cities are changing their whole traffic patterns to make sure that they have streets with protected lanes, and there's new forms of bicycles, including a lot of electric bicycles. Bicycles.
Bicycles, we're going to have a lot more, and we're going to have dedicated lanes, and it won't just be bicycles, it'll be the scooters and all those little things. And this is with regard to buses also. Remember that millennials don't necessarily feel like they want cars as much. And so public transportation is making a comeback. So it's going to be nicer, and it's going to be more accommodating. You're going to be able to watch movies, individual movies. You're going to be Wi-Fi'd up. It's going to be something to invest, not just resources in, but ideas in. If you can find a way to make public transportation cool, we know we have a generation of people who don't emphasize vehicles, like ours did. Like I wanted to get a car when I got 16. They're like, no, I don't want a car.
They're not even getting licenses at 16.
Yeah, they're not getting licensed until they're in 20s. So
The word is micro-mobility, scooters, bicycles, walkability, etc. Another phrase I want to throw out in the transportation spectrum is highways. There's a feud, if you will, between the advocates of transit and the advocates of highways. Do you see any likelihood we're going to be building less highways, or are we going to have to keep up with highways even at the same time that we're investing in transit and so forth? What do you see as the future of highways? Are they double-decked? Are they HOV lanes? Are they embedded congestion monitors in the roadways? Tell me about highways. And what about in the era of autonomous vehicles?
I think that whenever people start to have that discussion, it's just trying to set up a political fight, not on the highways versus transit perspective. It's really about land use, and we'll see if the millennials buy houses in the suburbs once they start having kids. I got into a nice argument with a millennial on the way back from Ocean City, Maryland. It's a 3-hour drive back to the Baltimore area, and we just fought and fought and fought, because the question is whether someone wants to pay $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment with a wife or husband or both or whatever, and two kids in the urban environment. So right now, this young millennial was a single person making a nice salary in a $2,000 apartment and riding a bike and using public transit. That's all good, but once you've got to go to Costco to feed the teenagers, I don't know, but someone else can take that. But I don't know if that's going to continue on when the millennials want houses and have lots of kids.
So, as a major city, who, if you look at our trajectory over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, we've actually been able to attract millennials to stay in cities because we are providing these amenities. It's walkable, they don't need a car, they can ride their bike. We have a significant number of dedicated bike lanes. We have great restaurants. They don't necessarily want the big house and 2 cars and yard anymore. They want smaller living. Their spending habits and our economic behavior is just different, and so we've made a we made a policy of attracting millennials and as well as attracting empty nesters as well. So, I will argue that millennials will stay in the city.
Let me try to guide the discussion.
Just one more thing about that. Just note that everything changes every other thing, and we just actually have millennials walk in. These are my millennials that walked into the Miami Gardens Junior
You're
Council
Garden
right
City.
Yeah. So everything changes every other thing. As millennials stay in the cities and urban areas and they become more crowded, they probably will want something else. But the conversation that we have, transit versus highway, it's not an or. We set up all these conversations like it's an or. It's
right.
Trains or buses or this or that. The truth is that a successful transit system is going to incorporate elements of all of those things. It has to.
Including future spending for highways?
Including that. We will be going up instead of out probably.
Yeah.
And we will find ways as technology changes and cars begin to float. And, I mean, we don't know what's next, so
right.
we don't know how we'll have to adapt to what's next. But we do know there is a next. We know that. And we know that we need first, last mile, we need long distance, we
right.
need dedicated time spans, we need all those things. So let me be a comprehensive system.
Mayor, you introduced us to the group of young people from your city, and that is a good segue to the main theme of this session, which is preparing the next generation for the jobs in the transportation sector. I wanted to introduce the subject by having the panelists share all of the things that are happening, all of the major debates, all of the major projections of what is on the horizon. I think we've done that. They've done it well. Now the question is, how do we prepare people for that? Let me begin by asking this question. Can each or any of you describe stellar, exemplary projects you know where training is occurring for the transportation field, where either a transportation entity has started it, or a public entity has started it, or a community college has started it, or even four-year public colleges. Do you know of cases where people are trained for recognizing the changes that are coming and the skills that are going to be needed, their commitments to prepare? Anyone? Yes, sir.
I would just start out, use an example of...
Come right up to the mic, please.
Sorry. Example of RTD in Denver on the Eagle and the Fast Tracks program there.
Yep.
And it wasn't one of those people you just listed, one of those entities. It was all of them. I mean, we had the, it was a P3, so we had the investors and the
Great.
contractors. We had the public agency, RTD, we had the VA, we had the local community college, the Chamber of Commerce, and we all went together and we developed what was called the WIN program, the Workforce Initiative Now program. And so we all worked together and we looked about what do we need to do to be prepared for this. We're impacting a number of people along a 50-some mile alignment here, and what we need to do and make sure they're involved there. So we all worked together, we laid out a program, and this is what we're going to need, and we set up training programs, and we had everyone ready, available when we were ready to go into the next alignments. And that was,
for what kind of a project was that? That was for rail?
It was a 50-some mile rail project.
In Denver?
In Denver. It went from the airport to downtown and then out west. And
got it.
It was a design, build, and then an operate and maintain for 30 years.
I know the section of that rail that runs across Denver is renowned as an excellent system. It's linked the eastern and the western suburbs and the center of Denver.
Yes.
And is highly admired. Can you tick off the skill sets that people should be trained for, or in that case were trained for, in order to contribute their skills to a project like that?
We didn't limit anything. It went anywhere from
but just give us an idea, just so we bring some concreteness.
To a signal maintainer.
Got it.
To, we have a 30-year contract to operate and maintain it. So now we need a full crew of people to maintain those trains for 30 years.
Meaning mechanics?
Mechanical people, hydraulic people,
hydraulics,
electricians, signal maintainers, which is the #1 need we have in the U.S. right now in transit.
What is that? Signal maintainers?
Signal maintainers.
What do they do?
They go out and maintain the signaling system that tells you when the train should go and stop. The
And what is that? What kind of a job is that? Computer technology or mechanical?
It's more of a basic electrical systems, learning that is systems technology. But these are not just providing a job, to meet a requirement for a project. It's a career. And that's one of the things that the P3s do. The P3s are not magical. They're, as Shanetta and I talked about earlier, they're not free money, but if you use them, you can make careers out of them and not just a job for delivering a single project.
That's very helpful to actually pinpoint the kinds of skills, because it brings some grounding here and not just in general terms. Does anybody else have specific ideas about skill sets that somebody is recognized and preparing people for this field?
Well, I know Brightline is doing a lot of training with regard to, Brightline is one of the corridors, the Eastern Corridor, but it's actually completely a private system that's being built out. And they did a lot of training with the locomotive engineers and signal trainers.
Eastern Florida?
Yeah, well, Southeast Florida is okay. Miami-Dade County through, I guess, all the way through Palm Beach County. But it's one of the corridors we designated as important, but it's actually being built out by a private company. But I just want to expand the conversation because these kids are here. And in truth, the job that's probably going to be most needed in transportation over the next 30 years is probably going to be a coder. It's probably going to be a coder. Because as technology grows, we know that everything that happens with regard to everything that you're going to build is going to be automated, or it's going to involve technology in some way that's going to require someone to write code. And so what I like to do when I'm working with our children, our students, it's not tell them they have to look into any particular field, but expose them to everything, because we can find a way to incorporate the artists that are among them into projects. We can find a way to incorporate the coders and the people with their hands. There's going to be something in everything, because the truth is that technology, well, engineering or transportation isn't just one thing. It isn't just technology or engineering or construction or art or land use, or it's really everything. There's something to do with everything in transportation. And so opening that up to them, understanding that you all exist. So I want them to see you all, because these are all people who are doing really well and they're good at their jobs and they have businesses and companies, and you can be them. And they probably wanted to be singers when they were young too. So I saw somebody over there looking like a pimp. No, I'm joking. There's opportunity in space there. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me.
If I may.
Yes,
to add to that.
Could you, when you speak, fill out the way Mr. Reed and the mayor did the kinds of jobs from an airport standpoint? I was at this. I mentioned earlier. I was at a work session in Jamaica, at a high school in Jamaica, New York, which is a heavily minority community, and the whole subject matter was, how do we prepare our young people for their share of the $3.5 billion in jobs that are going to be created to renovate JFK Airport. And they were down to specifics of training and specifics of jobs. Could you kind of give us a sense of that, please?
Certainly. I do want to go back to your other question, though, around places where stellar activity is happening, and not one in particular, but in all of our communities. I think there's more of these STEM-driven schools where that's science, technology, engineering, and math, and now they've even added arts to that.
Magnet schools, charter schools.
Charter schools. Those types of environments are creating the right thinking that's needed. You know, a lot of times in schools, and I sit on the industry board for my university, what's being taught is about memorization. We have to teach our young people how to problem solve, because any time that we have the issues that are going to around technology or whatever it is, it's about problem solving. It's about how do you get to something of a solution and not just memorization. So that's a big part, and again, I think those programs are happening across the country. In regards to opportunities at airports, most fields that our students are going to now in college exist at an airport. So IT, HR, finance, law, mechanics, janitorial, anything that is happening in the community is happening in our cities, are happening at airports. And we talk about that a lot of times, that an airport is a small city. So maintenance of roads, stormwater, sanitary, all of those aspects. So if you're thinking about anything in an airport, most of the opportunities that are going on in colleges and high schools, those same conversations apply at an airport.
So let me give you an example of that. I talked earlier today with the chairman of LAX, Los Angeles World Airports. And this is what he told me. The Los Angeles airport employs only 3,700 people. That's how many people get a paycheck that comes that says airport LAX. 3,700. But every day, 150,000 people report to the airport to work. Because they work for the airlines, they work for the fuel companies, they work for the transportation companies, they work for the constructors, they work for the computer people, they work for somebody else. But 150,000, you say it's a small city, it's a big city. 150,000 people work at the airport. Get this. The number of jobs that are created and impacted by the airport services is 600,000. So 600,000 people in the area of Los Angeles have their job because they have some relationship. They don't go to the airport as employees, but they handle cargo or have some other relationship. So it is a really, really big engine, you know, for our economy. Let me just say a couple of other quick things of examples. We mentioned, Mr. Reed mentioned Denver. Excuse me, in the RTD, the head of the Denver transit system, excuse me, a man named Phil Washington. That name mean anything to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a very accomplished head of the Denver system. I get choked up just thinking about it. He is now the head of Los Angeles Metro system. So he's gone from a big city, but not first tier, to the second largest city in America, running a multi-billion-dollar system. He's African American, Philip Washington. And some of these things that we're talking about that are happening, and good things like that, are a result of Phil Washington's tenure. Did you know Phil when he was in Denver?
Spent many years with him.
Spent a lot of time with him. He's a good man.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's an example of the kind of thing that is happening out across the country in airports. All right, we're going to go to questions from the audience. And you can ask anything you want related to transportation or related to training for transportation, jobs for transportation, ways to really kind of get the workforce ready. And every panelist doesn't need to answer every question. We're going to try to get your answer from somebody or several persons. Before we do that, I would like these young people that the mayor brought from Miami Gardens to please stand, because in some ways they are what this session is all about. Please stand up. And let me say to these young people, we value your perspective. This is a session on transportation and jobs in the field, but it's about creation of talent generally through high school, community college, four-year colleges, technical training, on-the-job training, retraining, all of the aspects of training, and you should feel free to ask questions. So if I see a hand go up from one of these young people, they're going to get called on first, okay? But
I forgot to mention,
here's a young man over here, a student over here that wants to speak first.
my city councilman, David Williams, he's my colleague on the city council, he's here, he snuck in. He's tall, but he snuck in.
Okay.
He just likes to hang out in the back of the room, so let's just...
This gentleman with the gold tie, you're first.
Hi, thank you. So for the past 35 minutes, this panel has talked about every element of transportation, but what I've not heard, or maybe I heard the word once, and that is safety. Everything we do in transportation, from funding to building, designing, and everything else reflects safety. America does not have a culture of safety. The mayor on the end said he was in Asia. And if you're in Asia, you know They have a culture of safety there that's second to none, okay? Everything they do in Asia is about safety. We have to begin to start building this whole concept around safety.
Do you think we don't?
I don't know. We do not in America have a culture of safety.
Explain. What tells you that we don't?
Training, example, is a culture of safety.
Training?
Training, yes. In Asia, in-house employees can conduct a midlife overhaul on a 10-car consist in 10 days. Here in America, no U.S. Transit does their own midlife overhaul. It's sent out. Consider the impact to the customer and to employees when that takes place.
How is that a safety shortfall?
How is that safety?
Yes, sir. How is that prove a shortfall in safety?
Well, first of all, I just said it's training and development. So if you don't have a trained up workforce,
right,
including psychological safety, which means I'm comfortable in my job, then you're not going to ever get to that level.
Got it. Okay. Let's see if any panelist wants to speak of the issue of safety as a priority in American transportation planning and execution.
Well, from an airport perspective, I mean, it has to be our number one.
Can you pull that?
So, better?
Yeah.
Okay. From an airport perspective, it has to be our number one. There are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes in regards to safety, and we have to make sure that one, our police department, our fire department, the airlines, the management of the airport, it is a constant conversation around safety and what that looks like. So as we bring people into the airport, and there's tons of different variety of folks that come into an airport, you can't always be on top of everything that happens, but the training that goes on to be able to look for potential violent acts, or to be able to look for those that are wanting to do harm to themselves or to others. There's a lot that goes on that the public does not see. So safety certainly is number one, and when we put aircraft into the air, or airlines put aircraft into the air, those planes are checked, the people that work on the plane, certainly you hear about some instances where something happens, but everything is always around safety. So from an airport perspective, it's certainly number one for us.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that probably none of us actually mentioned it, but it's kind of inherent in everything that we do. And so when we talk about the transit lines that we're building, the stations we're building, we don't talk about the security details and the safety details. When you talk about how we actually recruit people to work in places, we don't necessarily outline, oh yeah, this is what you have to have, this is what you can't have in your past, or these are the screenings that take place. And we talk about the companies that we hire to do maintenance. We're not talking about the background checks we do on all of their employees. We don't actually say that in the context of, yeah, we're going to build a station, but we don't talk about, you know, the people who are going to clean the restrooms. We're talking about the station in an overarching manner, and not the specifics of it. But clearly in the culture that we're in right now, when everyone, and I agree with you, America might not have a sense of safety in what it does and how it feels and how it speaks generally, but the businesses that we're in, we're building facilities and running facilities that are going to have millions of people walk through them. In an area where, you know, in a country where apparently you can get a gun as easy as you get a Slurpee or something. So clearly we're contemplating it very much. It's always at the forefront of what we do.
But the gentleman's point is well taken, because it is clear that safety is near the front of the public's priorities. I just described earlier, I'm working as a co-chair of this effort called Connect SA, which is all about the future of transportation. And when you list all of the attributes that we would seek in a project, accessibility, affordability, frequency, et cetera, the number one thing that appears in the public's mind is safety. They want roads that are not dangerous, airports that airlines that are dependable. Obviously, the purpose of transportation is to get people from point A to point B, not to get them hurt along the way. Let me see, I saw a gentleman over here somewhere. We have a student, I promise to take a student. And then you'll come next.
Okay.
And then I saw this gentleman over here. Yes, ma'am, young lady in the jean jacket. Blue jean. Yeah, there you go.
So, hi, my name is Aletia. Earlier you mentioned coding.
Do you mind standing up?
Yes, don't mind.
So we can hear you?
Okay, hi, my name is Aletia. Earlier you mentioned coding, but what as students can we do to make sure that everyone learns coding, even if it is not in schools? Because coding seems like it's going to be the new thing as you keep talking about it.
Anyone on the panel want to speak to that?
So what's interesting about that, I was talking with a student who was talking about coding, and they told me they Googled it. And they went on the onto the computer, and it actually laid out step by step of what you do to do coding. And I think it's happening in prison environments and confined environments. So I think the information is out there in some form or fashion. But I think that that's a good place to start, even if there's nothing that's being taught in schools, is to start there, or to find a person who is actually in the IT area and just talk to them, see what that looks like. My son, who just started a job at Google, is learning all about these different types of things and did not know that there's a lot of things that Google is doing for students in both grade school, high school, college, preparing them to work for Google or another search engine or anything like that. So I think that there's information that's there that we just have to find ways to get it out into the schools and to environments.
Yeah, and well, one of the things that we're doing is we're partnering with an organization back home called the Opelika CDC, Willie Logan. They do coding for kids. So they'll be bringing it to the community center. Because ultimately, I think that sometimes it does go on in schools, but we put a burden, everything can't be in the schools. There's going to be responsibility of the private industry, not-for-profit cities. We all have a place. We're all part of that village. And so one of the things that we're doing is bringing it to the community center. Good. With the other activities for kids.
Let me just ask of the audience if anybody can contribute to that question, the young lady's question about ways to provide coding instruction on a broader basis. Does anybody have any examples?
COMTO-CBCF.com.
Say what?
How to code. It will give. Lifehacker has a website that'll give you everything you need to learn how to code. You don't got to go to school for that. All you got to do is show proof of work. Everybody will hire you just because they want to see you know how to do it. Okay. FreeCodeCamp.com.org. Google how to code online for free. Swift, coding language by Apple. They have a platform you can use on the iPad. It's going to teach you how to code. Okay. There's companies right now in the college that will pay you to go to school to learn how to code. It's there for you to take.
Very good. That's a good answer. Okay, thank you. This lady right here had the next question. Yes, ma'am. And then come to this gentleman over here.
Yes, hi there. Good afternoon. Shanita Cleveland out of Dallas, Texas. Oh. And I have a quick question. This may be basic or simple-minded, but as we talk about the future of transportation, I'm just wondering, when are we going to ever put the proper funding in upgrading the quality of the concrete? Because you build a highway and the next thing you know it's crumbling again. So going into the world of autonomous vehicles and entering into the fourth industrial revolution, when are we going to revolutionize the type of concrete materials that we use?
Mr. Reed, you have you're the closest to it.
As I think you all may know, we're probably the biggest co-contractor of doing concrete highways in Texas. And I think the technology is going to continue to change. And we are seeing more and more. We've just, as you know, we've just won the large LBJ East contract, a multi-billion-dollar project to do this. And they're putting more and more responsibility back on us as contractors to maintain and guarantee this. So we're constantly looking for new methods and ways to make that life cycle possible.
Let me, tell me, just if you could briefly, are there changes in the makeup of concrete or in the technology of how concrete is made or in the materials that go into it that make concrete different than it would have been 20 years ago?
Absolutely. It's continuing the technology.
What is the key change? Not that this is the purpose of this session.
Let me turn around to our partners here, the engineers in the table here. It's the makeup of the materials inside of the concrete and how we do it.
Okay. It's interesting, and you think it's not related, but about 2 weeks ago, the consortium that was assigned to build the Great Hall in the Denver airport was fired because of inferior concrete. Do you know about that story?
Absolutely.
Can you say 30 seconds about it?
Nope. Sorry, it's a competitor of ours, so I would rather not comment.
Shanita, do you have any? What's the word inside the airport business?
Good call. So usually, and this is a part of engineering, construction, planning, all those pieces, people start to point fingers when things happen, and that's what's happening in this regard. One person says you designed it like this, one person says you did this. So it's pointing fingers.
Yet to be decided in the courts, probably.
Yeah, you'll have to get to the bottom of all that happens.
Billions of dollars involved in having to stop the work, push a contractor out, and bring a new consortium in. As a result of your question, concrete. Gentleman right here at this table was next.
We have a young person who has a question.
I had already called on this gentleman over here.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll come back to you.
Good afternoon. Now, you mentioned the rolling stock. You also mentioned Field Washington, the COMTO family. If America is ready to stop selling out America and invest in America, is it possible that Congress and federal government can support building a rail facility in the United States? Because I know that Field Washington testified before Congress about that, and I think his idea is to build an industrial park in LA to build. So if the federal government is willing to invest, is that a feasible vision?
That is a good question. I do not know the answer to that. I don't know whether we're even close to having the capability of building the rolling stock within the United States. I suspect we could. We did it once upon a time. We mobilized for World War II and built all kinds of things we'd never built before, built whole industrial centers in Detroit and the Kaiser Ship Works in San Francisco, et cetera. So it's a good question. Does anybody have any thoughts at all about any sense of whether that is technologically possible?
We have no idea, but the answer is that because we can't even speak to that now, but you have to elect people who are willing to do it. I mean, I get what people are saying, but if you go out and you vote for everybody who says, I'm not going to raise your taxes, and I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this, then say the next, that should be a comma or a semicolon. And the next thing is, I'm not going to build this factory. I'm not, because ultimately it's going to cost us. The federal government, they can just print money, but it's not wise. So if you elect people who reflect the values of a growing and expansive America that actually is self-sufficient from an industrial perspective, then we'll have people who do that and invest in manufacturing and research and development and technology. If you don't, then we won't. It's pretty easy.
There's a direct correlation between the fact that we let that technology slip away and we don't have anybody prepared to build it in the United States and the absence of the systems in the United States. Because we're reluctant to bring people from the outside, but we don't have the expertise internally, therefore it doesn't happen. So you got a good point there. If we had the people who knew what they were doing, building this technology, it'd be a shorter route toward getting it put in place. This young lady here was next.
Sorry, okay. Hello everyone, my name is Anais Site. I'm a senior at Miami Northern Senior High School. Everyone. Okay, my question is for you, Ms. Griffin. You previously mentioned how students need to learn how to think critically, and as a student in school right now, I know that's not a part of curriculum, so I wanted to know in what ways can students learn to think critically, to attain those skills, basically, and challenge their mind, basically.
Good, very good question.
Thank you.
You got me challenged. Well, I think in all of our daily lives, anything that we do, you will be confronted with a problem that needs to be solved. So just how you go about thinking about that problem, no matter what it is, even if it's what you're going to get up and wear in the morning, you make a decision on the different pieces that you're going to put on, how they're coordinated or whatever. So I think if you just always think about any decision or anything you're doing as a problem, with step by step by step of how you're going to solve that problem, you're doing critical thinking and you don't even know it. How you engage with your friends, you're making critical decisions and you don't even know it. So I think it's just something that you're always practicing, and you don't have that just to say it's a math problem and you're going to solve that math problem. Life is problems. And so just being able to apply that in everything that you do, I think that's your critical thinking right there. When you get into college, I heard you say you're a senior, and I'm hoping that you're considering college, most certainly. All right. One of the things that you have to, one of the things you have to really think about, and we talk about it a lot of time, is that time management and being able to think about what you're doing from a class perspective to your socialization to anything that when you're going to eat in a day, problem solving. So if you take that and apply that into your classroom, even though it's not said to you, hey, you got to solve a problem, but if you have 3 papers due in 1 week, you got to decide how you're going to get that done. That's problem solving.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me just add one point. I do believe that you have a very good point, but my sense is it's not going to all be accomplished in the schools. To the degree that you can get internships and opportunities in the workplace, where you have to think not just about what's actually happening on the job, but how to prepare for work and workplace attire and workplace culture and all of those things, and figure it out and process it in your mind. That is all a form of the skill set you will need going forward. Some of the most, I've noticed in recent years, almost everybody that I know that has advanced either in the political sphere or in business had a fire inside them that got them onto job situations early, and they absorbed as they went. And I just think it ends up being very, very important. There's no place to learn if you want to get into business success or professional success early than to have role models, people you can follow. And that is a form of critical thinking, because you're processing it for yourself on a daily basis, seeing what you think works, what doesn't work, etc. This gentleman over here had a question.
Yes, sir. While she's bringing the mic over, I'd just like to commend the mayor for bringing the students, and I would like to say, and I would like to say that before each one of you, sir, raising your hand there in the black suit, I want to make sure you and the other professionals in the room network with these students. Don't let any of these students walk out of this room without having one of your business cards, and then after this conference is over, I want you to give them a call from wherever you are. And we're talking about transportation. I believe that and you're talking about airports and construction. I always tell the students, and students, stop right there for 1 second, please, because I'm a former Miami-Dade County Public School teacher and administrator. Now I'm back in Kentucky raising hemp so that I can work with Toyota to put the fiber in the cars and get that contract.
Thank you.
But just very briefly, I would just like to say,
what is the question?
That well, the question is, how do we network with the students with our expertise, our global expertise, to get them to work with global economics and transportation? I always tell the students there are 54 countries in Africa. So if you can't find a job in the United States, you have 54 countries where you came from.
Okay.
And so if China can work with Zimbabwe to build an airport and send their people and send the money back to China, we can put some of that money into the United States, helping these children who have some ills
Okay.
that we are not financing.
Thank you. This gentleman over here, well, you had a question. You got to go? Okay. This gentleman over here had a question.
You gonna hold it? Okay. First of all, I want to say to the gentleman that said no one does midlife repairs on rail vehicles. I'm from Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, and unfortunately, or fortunately, we do have staff that do midlife overhauls on our rail transit vehicles. However, our rail transit vehicles are close to 30 to 40 years old. The process they go into is almost an artisan process to bring those trains back to life. And we've been fortunate that we've had a set of people who've been able to maintain and better their skill sets to complete that process. However, to that end, Cleveland, much like many other systems, are legacy. We're older. There's not a lot of money going to maintenance. There's not a lot of money going into taking care of systems that are in existence. So what we need also in this workforce and in this process, we need to make sure that we're getting funding and training to deal with the existing infrastructure and machinery. And we're not getting that, and we're wondering where we're going to see that support come from.
Thank you. Let me just ask a question of the panel as we wrap up. We're in about 10 minutes or so from wrapping up. We've talked about what's happening in the field. We've talked about the workforce issues and training. Let me ask you about opportunities in the field of financing transportation. There's a lot of changes going on in terms of the kind of money that's going to be required, the kinds of firms that are going to be brought to it, and a lot of opportunities for people of color in the finance sector. Does any of you have any thoughts about how this point of inflection, these new alternative systems will create opportunities in public finance or private equity where people of color can participate?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, public finance is one thing. I know that we've done some stuff in the past with Loop Capital, and
right.
So, but really it's going to be private equity and willingness to invest. And I use, as an example, we have a development in my city, not in the county, but specifically in my city. And we have property now that someone's coming in there putting up a huge development. And someone said, well, why didn't a black company do this? There are all these black people with capital and the capacity to do this. And it was interesting because the property had been on sale for 30 years. And the same people who they referenced, built stuff in other parts of the county. Okay, if you have to be willing to actually put skin in the game and actually take a chance. So now my city there's a lot of development going on. So it's easy to see how it was going to be successful. But back when I needed proof of concept, no one was jumping at the bit or chomping at the bit to actually do the work or make the investment. You have to be willing to take that chance.
So, Mayor, I think, let me just finish up with the Mayor. Mayor, your view is there's going to be more demand and need for private investment in core neighborhoods, and therefore, if there exists minority firms that have that capability, there is a need for them.
There has to be, because the current governmental structure is that they're not going to try to give us the money that we need. So we know that it's going to be private money, private equity that's going to come in. It's going to be some type of public-private partnership.
Now, there are some parts of the country that are prioritizing minority firms, minority women-owned businesses, and give them and create a percentage of a job and say 15% of the job, for example, at LAX, needs to be minority-owned firms or minority employers. In New York, it is now 30% because Governor Cuomo has signed an executive order for 30%. So there's more rationale for firms to come into existence, right? But once they are in existence, the question becomes, are they just trying to do exactly the same as before, or are they really stretching, as the mayor suggests, to put the money where it is needed to make changes in the society. That's a big challenge. So that is an ongoing debate of how this is going to sort out.
And let me just say that opportunity zones gives up us opportunity.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to see how this is going to work out, because what I think is going to happen with the opportunity zones is it's going to be big companies and people who come from other places who invest in black communities, and it's not going to create black wealth in black communities. That's what I think is going to happen, and I could be wrong on this.
Yeah.
I
think that's what's going to happen.
Treasurer Dunbar.
Just to the so the new forms of finance, and I think the challenge will be the type of infrastructure projects that will be funded, because the cost of capital is different between the debt capital markets where we access as an issuer and as a public entity versus the cost of capital when you think about equity. And so all that rolls down into taxpayers, and it all rolls down into the ratepayers of the systems that are being used. And so I think a challenge will be, as a private equity firm, if I'm coming into a marketplace and I want to invest in a project, however, I have a government entity that tells me what rates I can charge, and so that in turn affects the the return I could give to my potential equity partners. And so I think that will be the challenge, and I don't necessarily think I see private equity as a solution in the short term as it relates to financing, particularly public infrastructure projects, simply because the cost of public infrastructure projects right now are at historic lows. I saw a chart recently that showed the interest rates as it relates to financing public projects. If you look at taxable or tax exempt, over the last 40 years, rates have been this low from a tax exempt perspective 1% of the time over the last 40 years, and 2% of the time from a taxable perspective. And so that's a very difficult challenge for private equity to come in, given a return matrix that they're looking for. So
I think you're right, Treasurer. The only point of difference would be there are some instances where no matter how low the cost of public funds are, they simply are not available. There's either statutory limitations or debt limits, and so the project is not going to get built. It's just not going to get done.
Well, if you're talking about again, even if that municipality doesn't have that sort of the capacity,
right?
Then they would have to completely privatize that, that asset.
Right.
Any portion of it that's not privatized will still end up living on their balance sheet, which will still have a stress on their credit rating and what have you.
No, it's complex. There's no question about it. Complex problem. Did one other of you want to say something about this? Did I see another hand on this? Okay. This gentleman right here had his hand up earlier. Did you see somebody else?
Oh, her. Okay.
Right. You were, okay, you'll be next.
I just want to get back to workforce development. I was talking earlier today to my colleagues about
what happened to our mic?
The Texas Transportation Commission just approved $77 billion in heavy highway projects for the next 10 years. High-speed roads, and I had another $15 billion high-speed road project on top of that. Those are just two big programs.
Say that again.
$77 billion over the next 10 years for TxDOT work, and $15 billion for a high-speed well project between Dallas and Houston.
Who did that?
That's the program.
I see.
High-speed rail will call for 10,000 workers. So my question to you talked about y'all have experience with workforce development. Looking into the future, if you had it your way, is there any type of solution that you would think is the best solution to help mitigate against that issue of having a lack of workforce for our projects? Those are just two projects. Those are just two programs.
Ma'am. This young lady in the purple blouse was next. But so the core question is.
I'm giving from their perspective on how, if they can do it their way, how would they develop a program that could help increase workforce development for the huge deficit of workforce that's coming with all these big major programs coming down the pipeline?
Okay.
So at MDOT, as I mentioned way long ago, an opportunity MDOT with the P3 program that's getting launched in conjunction with COMTO. We have a board of folks that are going to be focusing on both training of individuals, because we want employees, but we also have an interest in that portion of the work coming from the local area. All right, so we want small business to be our subs for that big prime that's going to be the big dog. It's got to be a big dog because they're going to capitalize it. But we want to have in that contract language that makes sure that a nice large percentage. In the state of Maryland, our general percentage is 18 to 20. We go through our disparity study and we come up with that number. We want to make sure that the money stays in local communities and that workforce gets developed here and stays here after the work is done. Or for that project, because there are going to be so many phases, it's not 77 billion. That's amazing, but it's still 9 to 11, and it will last for 10 to who knows how long. We also have a coming surge inside the state of Maryland, inside of MDOT, of retirees, and a deficiency in filling those roles. We have incredible training programs all the way through. One thing I want to talk about, not to disparage coding, but I think that the young people, for the mayor when he goes back and when he talks to them, a fundamental background in STEM education. Yeah, I learned to code. I learned BASIC and Pascal and Fortran, 25 years ago. I don't use those languages. And actually, most of the IT people that I work with that are managing contractors that might code, they actually worry about the apps. So I'm sure that that will transition, and we will have AI doing some of the coding. So I don't want people to just tell young people they need to be able to focus on one thing. They need to get a classically trained education in STEM. Yes. And if you get a classically trained education in STEM, then you can be flexible. But so at MDOT, we are both trying to hire folks on these projects and give them the vehicles to train. And it's in other things like procurement. We have a shortage of procurement professionals that's ridiculous. We have a shortage of field maintenance technicians, which most people do, and it's part of the low salaries to start, and it's part of the consultants taking people as soon as they're trained, but we can keep that unemployment rate very low by keeping the feeder system in. But we got to train people to both be the small businesses and grow, and then vehicles have to be made so that the minority small businesses that start can become primes. And becoming primes is where we can actually feed ourselves, all that stuff. So.
This young lady had a question. Okay. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you.
So I want to thank you for the comment that you made earlier. You were saying that the reason why we're here is because of the young people that came in, and that is amazing. My suggestion would be next time when we have a panel to perhaps have a student on the panel so that we can help to elevate their voices. It's really great that they get the opportunity to raise their hand and ask questions, but if students are not given countless opportunities to elevate their voice, what we say to them is null and void. It's not always what we say, it's what we do.
Got it? Right. Okay, thank you. This lady in red will have the final question today.
I have to hold it. You have to hold the mic? Oh, okay, good, because I come from a Pentecostal church. I may not let it go. Anyway, my comment is more than a comment than a question. I'm Stephanie Nellens Page, and I'm with Texas Central working on that $15 billion project that Ruben referenced, and it's all private. But what's unique about this is that most of us have worked for public entities, and you have goals for MWBE participation. We're a private company, privately funded, data-driven, that are investing in MWBEs and the workforce. We're collaborating on the workforce with community-based organizations. In Texas, we enjoy a 3.2, 3.4 unemployment rate, but in underrepresented communities, we know that it's double digits. So we're making sure that we're working with the community-based organizations, the philanthropic.
That's exactly what we're here to talk about today.
That's right. The philanthropic organizations, the community colleges, and the workforce boards, all collaborating together to actually go to the school districts and the like to start training people on and educating the students on this field in transportation. So I think that's a big first step, because I know when I got in the field and my mother told me, she said, well, what you going to do, drive a bus? I was going to get a master's degree in transportation and logistics. So it's an education that we have to start. Okay, the second piece of it with the participation, we know that it's a lot of work, $15 billion, and to have X% of that, it's a lot of work. But I think also I would encourage the businesses to start teaming, the small business collaborating and thinking about what those opportunities look like and how they can come together to have that kind of capacity. I've closed.
That's very good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let us thank these panelists individually. Christian Dunbar, the Treasurer of Philadelphia. Shanetta Griffin, Columbus Regional Airport Authority. Joe Reed, Balfour Beatty, and our expert on concrete, Charles Glass, Secretary of Transportation for the state of Maryland, and the Honorable Mayor Oliver Gilbert of Miami Gardens. Thank you for being great participants. I hope you feel it was a productive exchange of information. Thank you very much.
First of all, lastly, let's thank the Honorable Henry Cisneros for his moderation. Okay, and two things. I'd like to thank and recognize the COMTO Board of Directors, members of the Board of Directors who are here. Can I see some hands? Okay. This is our board. This is our leadership. I want to also thank the staff of COMTO National, COMTO National staff, and our Council of Presidents. So thank you all. Freddie Fuller would like to come close out with you.
Hey, stop trying to run so fast, because I have a very important announcement. We actually ended 15 minutes early, so please bear with me. I'm going to take a, hold up, please.
Hold up, please.
I want to take a moment, please. Hold up, please. Yeah, it's not over. I want to take a point of personal privilege. As the chair of the COMTO board, there are a couple of announcements that we need to listen and take advantage of. First of all, Brad, thank you. But more importantly, the young lady mentioned having a young person on the panel. Next year's National Meeting and Training Conference, a COMTO, will be hosted by a COMTO Fort Lauderdale chapter. We have a youth symposium on Saturday that focuses specifically on high school students. So I'm going to challenge Mayor Oliver Gilbert. You showed up and showed out today. I want you at I want your students at the youth symposium at our national meeting next year. That's going to be on Saturday, July 18th. Laverne mentioned safety. I have a couple of announcements about the safety and security of your families. I have two job announcements. First of all, at Jacobs, the Black Employee Network, Harambe, is helping our chair and CEO recruit for a senior vice president of cyber. He told us at our summit last month that the next senior vice president that will be hired at Jacobs will be black. I need names. You can get my phone number and my email address. I need names for someone that's qualified to be a senior vice president for cyber at Jacobs. The other thing, when you have the opportunity to be on boards and positions of leadership, it doesn't matter if you don't take advantage of it. I am the Secretary Treasurer of APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. We are hiring a CFO for APTA. I need names. We want the next CFO to be a person of color. And if I don't take this opportunity as the chair of COMTO to make these announcements, then when do I do it? So get with me. I'm Freddie Fuller. It's freddie.fuller@jacobs.com. And my number is 703-439-0085. We are hiring for senior positions. Both of these are senior positions, and I need your help. Thank you for being here. Have a great conference.